fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. So in the previous video I showed a do-it-yourself of how to make a bushcraft net. I consider this to be the ultimate bushcraft net to use when you're out in the field. And I brought along a project that we did a few videos back where this is a pack frame that I did using my modular ropecraft system. So I'll be using this as part of the examples today. But in this video I plan on going through a bunch of different kind of in-field examples of how I can use this net now that we've got it made out in the field to help us with a bunch of common tasks that you'll come across as you go through your days, yeah? So if you're interested in that kind of content, stay tuned. So I know this net's not the easiest to see on camera. It's one of the kind of points of making nets like this. You want them to be low key, but I will keep that, in mind, if you will, as I'm going to do these examples and try to come in as close to show you exactly what I'm doing as possible so it's clear as best can be, right? But the thinking will be that I want to do some of the more utilitarian functions that this net will serve. The first obvious one is it's a fishing net, and I'll talk about that in greater detail as we go through the video. But the second one is I can transform this now into a backpack to work with my pack frame. So I'll come in close and I'll show you kind of how I achieve that result, yeah? Okay, so as the first order business, I've got the net set out in front of me, like I say. Now I'm going to take one half of the net and I'm just gonna fold it over onto itself. And now along the side here, you're gonna see a bunch of these kind of little modular units here. And what I'm gonna do is connect those together so that both sides kind of fuse, and this turns into the core of the bag. So I'll come in close while I do this so it's crystal clear. But in essence, I'm going to walk through each one of these and connect them, and I'm going to leave a couple to strap to the pack frame so that it hooks right onto it, yeah? So I'll come in close and I'll show you the details of that. So now what I'm going to do now, like I say, I've got these little components here, and the net is literally just folded over on itself, yeah? So what I'm going to do now is just turn around and take one of these components from the one side, and I'm going to take the other side of the netting, just the green and the yellow, and I'm going to pass it around that. Then I'm going to turn around and fold it over, make like a little lark's head hitch here, and I'm just going to hook it onto the knot that sits on these units. And in the do-it-yourself video I talk in great detail of exactly how I make these little things. So if there's any mystery to what I'm doing when it comes to this stuff, you can go back and watch the previous video and you'll see. Now I'm just going to turn around and hook these on all the way along, and like I say, so I'm going to take the one from the other side now. I just want to make sure I grab the two greens and the yellow that's on its opposite side, and I'm just going to put my little looped ears, turn them sideways so I get a loop, and take the other side of that component, feed them through, and then just apply tension. And it just allows these little lark's head knots to lock up now and in essence join this net together on its side so that everything kind of hooks together as we go. And I'll keep doing that over and over again now with each one of these, because really the more we connect, the more that we know that we're just going to have both sides of the net well fused to each other, yeah? And this whole process only takes a matter of a couple seconds, really. I'm going slow so that you guys can really see this on camera, but when you're out in the field and you're doing this, you're going to go rapidly and you're not going to take your time. You're just going to haul as you become familiar with the process, yeah? So, but as you can see now, hopefully you're catching that real crystal clear, where that lark's head knot just sets in behind this knot and it has nowhere to go, and it just locks those two together. I'll do this one side and then I'll go off and do the other side off camera and just hook it all together so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. But we got two more to go, and now normally one of the ones down on this end, this is kind of the bottom of the bag, if you will, I'm gonna leave one of those to hook onto the pack frame, and I'm just gonna set the other one in place as kind of my last one. And just as simple as that, I now have the two sides of the net kind of hooked together and they're interlocked. And that way they're not going anywhere, they're not going to come apart and stuff, but I've still left the one spare, like I say, to hook onto the pack frame. So I'll go off and do the same now to the opposite side of the net over here. and just connect those two together, or those, you know, set together, and then this will become the opening of the bag here, and then it's all net on that side. So in essence, it's the bottom of the bag, if you will, right? So like I say, let me go off, shift camera angles, I'll go off, I'll just hammer that out of the way, and then I'll show you strapping this onto the pack frame. Yeah. All right, so I've quickly gone off and just hooked on the other side all along here. So now we've got both sides connected, and I left one of these little modular components here, one on that corner, and one on this corner, and that's just for wanting to strap stuff on and that later on. There's enough of these down the side where it gives a good connection and makes it like a solid bag, net bag, if you will, without having to worry about every single one of these. But like I say, I'll go and grab the pack frame now, and we'll look at strapping this onto the pack frame. Yeah. Okay, so I just went and grabbed my pack frame, and I threw it down on the ground in a spot where there's a little less leaf litter underneath. Hopefully it'll help kind of keep the camera a little cleaner. But all I'm going to do, and just as a side note, I showed in the previous example in the do-it-yourself of how to make this unit. Now, if this is a fully functioning backpack as it is right now, I can fully use this to do whatever tasks I want, to be able to strap gear to it and just go, yeah? But one way or the other, I'll grab the net now, and we'll set this on top of this unit, and we'll strap it on so it all becomes a complete unit. Yeah. So you can see now I just took this net and simply laid it on top of the pack frame. Yeah. Now where we had the ones that were on the bottom here, I want to turn around and just brace those right onto the corner units of the frame. So I'm just going to come underneath, come around, and I want to just create those little lark's head knots like I was doing before, exactly the same as I've done over and over again. And now I'm going to take that knot off its own unit and just feed it through, and there's just enough space to get that through and just allow it to apply some tension, and it allows this net to now be locked onto this pack frame. Yeah, so it's all interconnected. I'm going to do the same on this point, and then I'll do the two top points as well. Yeah. So now I've hooked on both sides of the net, if you will, and you know that only takes a second, right? Now with these top ones, there's this little kind of overhang on the pack frame where I can turn around, and all I do is, it's just the loose one, right? I'm just going to pass it through the other side to make sure that it's connected well there, and then I'm just going to take this loop and bring it up and just hook it onto the top of the pack frame. It doesn't have to be tied in or anything. You know, as we go through time, gravity's going to hold that. It's not going to go anywhere. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm just going to pass it through to make sure it's through both sides of the net, and then I'm just going to bring it up, and I'm going to hook that onto its opposite side. This bag is now strapped onto there. It's not going anywhere. So I'll go and grab my other backpack and just throw it in there for a load, and then I'll step the camera back so you can see it a bit, that this has now become a fully functioning backpack. Yeah. So I'll just show you now loading up this pack frame. Yeah. So like I say, we've got the net fully strapped on there now, and I'm just going to take the bag that I brought in, my little backpack that I brought in with me, and I'm just going to toss that into the net. I'll flip it over so that the camera can see the orange. It's a little better. And now the center point roughly of these nets, I'm just going to take the two of those, I'm going to bring them up, and I'm just going to set them onto those tops as well, those little catches, and it really just keeps the netting closed, and it keeps it all like up higher on the center of your back. Yeah. So now when it comes to this pack frame now, like I say, I'll just turn around and strap it on, give you a full example of this pack frame. Like I said, it was all built with the modular Bushcraft system, and so this is all kit I would regularly have. I'm just going to hook it around the little corner bits on the backpack here, or the pack frame. I'm just going to hook that on and apply tension to the point where it's sitting higher up on my back. And now I just take my modular Bushcraft system, and using quick connects, exactly as I've shown with those examples in previous videos, I'm just going to turn around and use it like a belt across the front now, where I can strap that on and it's connected. Yeah. So as you can see, this pack frame now is able to carry as much load as that net will handle. Yeah. And it's firmly on there, like it's not going anywhere. That netting is really secured and strapped on there, but it's pretty well done without any real knots. So when I want to take this off and use it for other tasks later on, you know, it's not a difficult thing. Now, the primary use I would have for this kind of construct and this setup is, you know, if I had my backpack and say one of the arms on the pack itself broke, or the bag ripped a hole or something, and the bag itself, my backpack, got compromised, you know, I could easily turn around with some sticks and a half decent amount of cordage, construct something like this out in the field on the fly expediently, right? You know, yes, it takes a couple 100 feet of cordage, but generally speaking, I normally carry that amount of cordage with me when I go into the woods. And it's one of those things where to make this entire construct now, you know, the pack frame, the net and everything, you're talking 5 or 6 hours. So you're going to lose half a day if you're compromised and you're out in the middle of the wilderness. But if you've got the cordage, you can end up whipping together something like this that allows you to turn around and kind of carry on and stay being mobile, yeah, without compromising your gear, you know. So like I say, I'll just pull my pack back out of there, because now I'm going to go on in the video and show other examples here, and you can see that net's a half decent size. I can hold probably, I want to ballpark 20-30 liters worth of gear in here, you know. So if you've got cooking pots and other stuff, you can toss them in here. And this whole thing, like, I'm holding it up by 2 fingers. This whole thing is extremely light. It's really just a bit of bamboo and the cordage. At best, I would say this is maybe 6-8 ounces. You know, and for the capacity that it gives me for something that I can make myself, to me it's unmatched. But like I say, there's other examples I want to show in this video using this net now. So I'll take this apart and detach it down the sides, turn it back into a base net like we started with in the beginning of the video, and we'll start to talk about some other examples of what we can do with this beast, yeah? So, and I guess I should show you this part. Sometimes I just get into it and start hauling, right? But now I'll just show you disconnecting off this pack frame. So we had this little connection that we did here. All we have to do is grab onto that little loop that's there, kind of loosen it off a bit. It gives enough room where I can pop it over those 2 knots. And as simple as that, I'm back off this pack frame again. I'm caught in the toggle of the pack frame, but as you can see, really elementary. And I'll just show that once more. I'll try to get that up close as I can here. So this is where the little loops are that we connected the sides of the net together. I'm just going to take this little part right here, I'm going to pull it, and then it just opens up and allows that whole thing to just come loose. And I can disconnect these. So just as fast as that, I find them on each one of these, I pull it and just disconnect them. Pull it and disconnect them, and it's just that simple, and the net starts to just come all back apart. So I'll go off and do that to the rest of them, just to get the net back into a flat full shape again. But I just wanted to show that little detail, because like I say, I know I just kind of get going and I forget to show some of the little details that I should be showing. So, and as you can see, 20-30 seconds later, I'm back to the point of having my net just back to its original state, if you will, yeah? So I'll show you one more kind of a backpack net setup that you can do given this construct. You know, sometimes you don't have the time to go and hook all these little side pieces on. You know, sometimes you're in a rush. You know, ideally I like doing the setup we just showed, because it gives me these extra little things that I can strap onto the pack frame. But I'll shift camera angles now, and I'll show you kind of a really quick and easy way that we can just throw gear onto this net, seal it up, take it and go, yeah? So I'll stop and first off show you how the cinching mechanism works here, and then we'll do a load up and that kind of stuff, yeah? So now I'll show this again. I showed this out, I just didn't think I got the best detail of exactly what I was doing in the do-it-yourself video of how to make this component. But on the end here, so we've got this orange cordage that kind of wraps around the outside perimeter of the net, yeah? And on the end, we've got this tag bit that kind of sits there, and I could make this a bit smaller. I probably will as we move through time, but, you know, separate from that, let's just go through the example, yeah? So you're gonna see there's 2 knots on here. We got one knot here is kind of like, the first knot's like a stopper knot, and then the second knot allows me to do a sliding kind of lock here. So this is a modified Fairmont hitch, and I showed how to make this in the previous video, but in essence I can take this unit now and just slide it down the line. and it allows me to apply tension. And wherever that stops, if I try to pull from the opposite sides on this side, it'll want to lock and hold. It doesn't want to let that go. It will, like if you really kind of give it, but it's really just made to be kind of a cinching lock, if you will. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is use this to contract the outside of the perimeter of the net around my gear. So I'll use the backpack that I've got here, you know, this little pack. I'll just toss that onto the net and show you the example with a different camera angle of exactly what I'm talking. So now, like I say, sometimes I'll be in a rush and I just won't have the time to stop and do all the configuration of that kind of, you know, that kind of stuff. But if whatever my gear is, I can easily just throw that onto the net. I can take this now sliding cinch that sits here, this modified Fairmont hitch, and I can just start to apply tension on that line and make it that it all just cinches up around this gear, whatever I've got sitting on the net. And I can just apply tension to the point where I'm tied off. This is now a closed net on every side. It's just got the gear, and I've got a bunch of hang points now. If I wanted to strap additional gear on using these same things, I can loop it through whatever the gear is and just toggle it on. So they can be used in this regard as well. And I'll just grab my pack frame. And with the pack frame, because I've got all the these little modular tie-offs, the cordage carabiners I like to call them, since I have these cordage carabiners all strapped to the top now, I'm not able to connect down to the bottom of my pack frame. But it's easy enough for me to turn around and quickly just take my pack frame and strap it onto the top as such, where it's not fancy. I'm just looping around and around until I get to the point where I can hook on that loop that I have in the, and now I'm strapped on. Like I say, this isn't the most secure. It wobbles way more and that kind of stuff, but I can still connect gear onto my pack frame really rapidly in that regard. Of, you know, I could have had a half dozen things, a dozen things I just threw onto the net, pulled the cinch, grabbed it up as such, and off I went. You know, ideally I like to have it the other way, where I can do the little cordage carabiners to strap to the frame and stuff. But if I'm in a real rush and I need to move, this option is available to me too. And like I say, I strapped up the armbands in the pack frame, but you can see how quickly I could easily turn around, throw my gear onto my net, take it and go. Yeah. And like I say, I don't prefer this method, but it is faster and it's a simpler method. And when it comes to, I'll just take this all apart now, when it comes to getting my gear back out, the one thing I do like about this setup though is that cinch, because it closes up the top, it really lowers the risk of anything kind of falling out the top of the bag, if you will. Yeah, because you're really cinched in place. But now when it comes to this cinch, I simply just grab onto the two bands and start to slide it back out, and I can take that right back out to that knot that was sitting, the first little stopper knot. I can take it right back out to there, and now just open up my net. And it's normally a little bit finicky because, you know, tension, but easily start to pop my gear out. So you can see, using this almost like a laundry bag, satchel, I don't know what to call it exactly, allows me to do really rapid kind of grab my gear and go. Yeah. So I'll straighten this all back out to be the net, and we'll carry on with further examples now. Yeah. But as you can see, 10 seconds later, I'm back to having my original square net that we started with. And how do I know kind of where to make it square? So because I've got these little cordage carabiners tied off, I know the knot after the last one is the corner knots, because when I built this, that's how I designed it. So, you know, if you're kind of wondering how to get it back to a square state really easily, you'll remember when you made it that that's the nature of how you made it. So it's easy enough to figure out which knot in the line gives you your square and get you back to your original set. Yeah. But as you can see, this took about 5-10 seconds to straighten back out and be back into original net form. Yeah. So now one of the common tasks that we have when we're out in the woods doing bushcraft, you know, activities, is gathering firewood. Yeah. So, you know, I've just got some wood I pulled from the area just to make this example quick and simple, but it's easy enough to turn around and stack your wood in a pile on top of your net. And then, like I say, this net is just the square basic net. But now with the way we designed this net, we designed it where right by where these little cordage carabiners are, right near there is that knot, which is the corner. if I grab those, I designed this to be just big enough for a hand to go through. So it's easy enough to put both hands through, and then I do the same with the other corner of my net. And I can pick this up now and carry my loads of wood with ease, right? So, you know, doing camp tasks like this, you know, using this net as a wood carrier is one of the basic kind of common tasks you would do on a regular basis, and it stops you from just having to fumble everything in your hands and that. And I can carry far more wood than I have here, but this is just to show kind of a quick example of how easy it is, right? And this is just using the net as a basic net. I'm not, you know, I haven't done any weird configuration or anything else with it, but hopefully that gives you an example of, you know, if I'm out in the field and I wanted to gather up some stones or some wood and that kind of stuff, because I use this paracord as my netting material, this number 36 tarred bankline paracord has I think it's 320 or 330 pound test, so it's a strong cordage, and where it's all connected in this webbing of netting, you know, it makes it extremely strong. This stuff, a single thread of it could potentially carry my body weight, to give you an idea. So carrying wood and these types of things, you know, is a fairly minor thing for this cordage to be able to handle. And it's designed to be, you know, abrasion resistant and all that kind of stuff. That's the nature of tarred bankline. It's one of the reasons why in the bushcraft community we like using a lot of the paracord and tarred bankline and that type of stuff. Not only is it cheap, but it's strong for its diameter, and it's really resistant to the elements. So, you know, when you're out in the field, you don't want to have your cordage break. So, you know, number 36 tarred bankline is always recommended in my books, and same with the 550 paracord. You know, to me, they're bulk standard cordage that we use when we're out in the field, yeah? But hopefully that gives you yet another example of, you know, using the net as a wood carrying device. Like I say, it's only a simple example, but there's not much to carrying wood when you're out in the field, right? But you can use the net to do tasks like this without having to have secondary gear with you. I know in previous videos I've shown ways to do it just with 550 guy lines and those types of things, and really, you know, the more knowledge you have, the more you're able to do with ease, right? So, you know, even you can carry wood with far less cordage than I'm showing in this example, but it's just another example of how I can use this net to do multiple tasks when I'm out in the field. So I'll stop now, I'll shift camera angles, and we'll go on to yet another example of the types of things I can use this net for in the field, yeah? So as you can see, you know, this net's pretty small and it's pretty light, right? But it doesn't have to be used in isolation. Now, if you watch previous videos of mine, you'll see that I've made the modular ropecraft systems, and I showed using those with the pack frame for the tarred bankline version of those. But I also brought along my Kevlar ones. So now for the next example, I'm going to show how I can turn this net into being a seat between two trees to kind of get me up off the ground and that kind of stuff, yeah? And I'm going to use my Kevlar modular ropecraft system to help with that task. So let me just shift. I've got to move up the hill to some trees that are a little better suited here, and I'll show you that example next. Okay, so I've got two trees here that should be a good example. So these are sitting at about 8 foot across from each other, and there's about a 6-8 foot gap between, maybe 7 or 8. You know, it's a little wider than my arm span is when I stretch my arms out, yeah? But needless to say, each one of these trees now is a couple foot in diameter, so they've got a width on them of about 3 foot, and I want to have the width be a little more than 2 feet ideally, because I want the net to be stretched out and to be flat and square when it's strung up between the trees, just as I showed in the example when I was doing the do-it-yourself of how to make these components. I'm doing the exact same technique here to now strap them up between the trees. So I'll go off and do the basic kind of wrapping the Kevlar modular ropecraft systems around the trees and getting them ready, and then I'll just show the details of exactly how I hook them on once we get to that point. So now you can see I start off with everything just kind of really loosely set. So I put my net on the ground, it's sitting there. I know it's hard to see because of the camera. You might be able to pick it up, you might not, it depends on your res, right? But all I've done is wrapped my modular ropecraft system to make sure that I was around this tree. So it went around here, and then I have a separate one that goes around that tree, and both the ends are just coming out a bit on both sides, yeah? And I didn't need to use all of my modular ropecraft systems for this task. It's a pretty small scale with what we're doing, but now I'll come in close and I'll show exactly what I'm doing to hook onto the nets, yeah? Okay, so this is where I know the camera might get a little funky, but such is life, right? So this right here is my net, yeah? And I've got a little cordage carabiner. That's the last one that sits on the side. And I know the next knot over is my corner knot. That's just the way I've designed it, and it'll be clear if you watched how I make these nets, exactly how that's the case. But I'm gonna take my modular ropecraft system. Now on this end, I've got a loop, and there's a little knot there. So I'm just gonna take it, I'm gonna open up the net, I'm going to feed it around that knot through the doubling of the paracord. I'm going to feed it around that, and I'm going to go around that knot and come back through the doubling of the other side and just pull it through. And I'm going to take this knot now and just get it through enough where I'm able to hook into one of my locked brommels on this side. And I'm just going to let that sit now as such, with just the smallest amount of tension to make sure that that's kind of set. Now I've got to do that same kind of connection. I've got to do this to each of the 4 corners of the net, and I'll slowly lift it up in the air, and then as I apply tension, you'll see everything just becomes rigid, and it's all of a sudden a seat that's floating up in the air, yeah? So let me just go off and do exact same kind of thing to hook on these 3 points and the other 3 points, you know, the corners, if you will, to go hook those on, and then I'll show you kind of how I tighten this off. Now this is one of the other corners of the net. Now on this end of my modular ropecraft system, I'm left with my knot, and then I've just got the little taper point. And if you've seen how I make these units, that'll be clear to you exactly what this is. But in essence, it's just the other end of my Kevlar modular ropecraft unit. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to feed it through the doubling of the paracord there, back out through the other doubling of the paracord on the other side of its corner knot, bring it up, and like I say, I'm just gonna open up, there's little loops that sit along this line. I'm just gonna open it up and pop that knot right through one of those loops, and then just allow it to have just the slightest amount of tension, just so I know I'm locked on at that point. And that shows you both sides of the Kevlar modular ropecraft system of kind of how I connect to these units, yeah? Now I'm gonna go and hook on the other sides, and as I do that, we're gonna start to get tension in this net, and the net's gonna start to lift up off the ground. So I'll shift my camera angle back, and I'll just kind of record as I go, yeah? So like I say, I've got the first 2 sides somewhat connected, and now that I've kind of got those hooked in, I'm now going to come over and do the same thing on the knot that sits on this side, where I'm just going to take the end of my modular ropecraft system, feed it through both knots, or both the loops there in the paracord, like I showed earlier. And now with this one, I'm going to pull and give it a bit more tension, because I've got slack that goes around this tree, and I'm going to start to take up that slack as we go as part of this process. So one way or the other, we'll start to slowly lift off the ground. So I'm going to put in my knot into the locked brommel on this side, and now there's 3 out of 4 of my sides connected, and with this side now, I'll start to apply some decent tension. Now we're going to start to slowly lift this off the ground, and like I say, it'll be the same with this final corner now, where I'm just feeding my modular ropecraft system through and making sure I'm hooking right on the knot of the corner of that net. And that's one of the kind of key components, if you will. Now as we go, I'm going to end up kind of wandering off camera, but you can see that it starts to really climb up. And I'll just set this now temporarily. You can see it's just kind of floating off the ground now, and there's not a huge amount of tension. I'm going to come back to the sides I started on and apply more tension on those sides now. And I just pop it loose out of the knot, start to apply a bit more tension, make sure I'm pulling around the tree as I go, and then I hook into a locked brommel further up the line. As we put into that one, and I do the same on this, and you kind of just toggle and adjust it as you're going to keep increasing the tension. And then what you're going to end up doing as you go as well is, now that we've got enough tension where everything's kind of locking and holding, now I can adjust on the tree how high up I want this seat to be before I go committing to it. So I'm just going to turn around and adjust on my sides a little bit more here, and I feel like this tree, it's down lower, and you're working with the slope of the land and everything, so a lot of this is kind of just being done by feel, if you will, in a lot of ways. And if I feel like it's getting too loose, I can just apply more tension. Now I've got some drop lines that sit on my modular rope craft system. I can just shift those through those loops, you know, and this stuff is a little bit finicky, but it's all pretty simple to do. And you can see I'm slowly raising it up and applying more and more tension as I go. And I can do the same to all four sides, and I'll just continue doing this process until I get it to the height I want and to be positioned in between the trees where I want it to be. So I'm just gonna pop that one in. And that's the good part about the modular rope craft system. I can just pop my locking knots. I can pop those in and out wherever I want to set them, and just lock them in temporary holds until I get it exactly where I want it. So I'll just keep messing about with this and applying tension, and you'll see as it just becomes rigid and squared off more, that everything just locks. I'm trying not to waste too much time on this, but I also want it to be comfortable, right? And we're starting to get a half decent amount of tension on there now, where this is really starting to lock in place. And if you feel like it's starting to shift and it's not square, it's easy enough to just pull on the one side to kind of straighten out the skewing of it, if you will, as you go. You want to make sure all your tension is equal across the unit, so that there's no kind of one side doing all the work, if you will. I'm just going to make this a little tighter, and we're almost there. And now this net is set in place where I'll come around now, and see, I'll sit on this net, and it's very, very, very comfortable. Now, one of the good parts about this net design, right now this is only big enough to be a seat, you know, but the version we made here, this was a 2 foot by 3 foot square net. But where we've got these cordage carabiners that sit on here, not only can I hang gear, in fact, I'll just grab a water bottle and I'll show you that. And now that I've stretched this out a bit, I'll even apply a bit more tension, just so everything kind of sets better. Because even though Kevlar doesn't have a lot of slack, it'll still have a bit of stretch and stuff, and you want to kind of work that out with the first couple times you sit in it, right? But I got my water bottle. I'll just grab out of my bag here as an example, where if I now want to turn around, I've showed this in previous videos, it's just a Gatorade bottle where I've got a loop of cordage, and that same lark's head knot that I put, I just hook that right onto the lip of the water bottle, and it just gives me a way to kind of hook onto my water bottle. But now with any one of these cordage carabiners, because they're just readily strapped to this net, they instantly become points where I can tie off to, just the same as I was joining them together when it came to linking the two sides of the net together. I can make locking loops here using those, where that water bottle is strapped on there. It's not a quick release. It'll take me a little bit of a second to kind of remove the lark's head and get it off, but you can see I can now, on any one of these points all the way along, I can now turn around and strap gear on. But one of the good parts, like I was saying here, let me just sit back down again for a second and pop this off. So one of the good parts about the way that these nets are made and using these cordage carabiners like I'm using is they're modular themselves. So almost everything I do when I'm out in the field, and believe me, this is comfortable, almost everything I do when I'm out in the field, I do in a modular sense where they can interconnect with each other. So let me just take a sip of water here for 2 seconds, and I'll explain out exactly what I mean by that. So these cordage carabiners, I've got them strapped on just to the length side of the net, yeah? I could easily turn around, make a couple more, and strap them onto here. But if I standardize exactly how I make these nets, and I do offsets of them, it's easy enough for me to link nets together. So if I had a second net that was built out exactly the same as we've already done here, I could link it on here and use these cordage carabiners to interconnect the nets. And I can do that whether it's width or in length, and I can expand it out where this becomes almost like a hammock between two trees rather than just a seat. We can take it right to the next level and make it that it's full bedding that exists between two trees. And the one thing I like about this, I mean, we're already relatively close to that with the size we have now. It's just a bit short, right? But as you can see, it's just not quite enough to pass out in. I mean, you could, but it wouldn't be great, right? But the one thing I like about using nets rather than hammock systems and that is there's no pinching at your head or at your feet. So like I say, if I turn around and build off a second one of these and I put cordage carabiners on the ends and just interlink those and join them to become longer netting structures, it allows me to turn around and create bedding between trees, which is way better than a hammock in my mind, because we're not going to have that pinching at the head or feet. But I can also turn around and, like I say, none of this is strapped up using any type of permanent knots or anything. So it's easy enough for me to turn around and release my modular ropecraft system. I'm back down to my net, and if I want to hook this up with, you know, some wood and that kind of stuff, toss it in the water and use it as a fishing net, I can totally do that, right? And if I've got more than one of these, I can use one for seating, one for fishing, one for, you get the idea. So having these units in a modular system themselves, just in the nature of having these cordage carabiners strapped onto them, really makes them super flexible. And if you wanted to expand them out and have larger platforms that you were using with the netting in mind, right? So I'll stop now and I'll see where I'm at in my examples. I had a whole list of different stuff, and I'm kind of debating. There's still a bunch of examples I wanted to show that are kind of fishing and water related, but right now I'm kind of up on the higher lands, so I'm not really close to the water supplies to show those videos. So potentially I might break it into a two-part video doing different examples, because I know this one's already getting a little bit long, yeah? But yeah, let me just stop and I'll shift camera angles, and I'll kind of make a determination of what else I can show when I'm up in the highland versus when I'm down in the, you know, down by the water's edge and that kind of stuff, yeah? But that's, I know I've got multiple examples for the water's edge stuff, so I could easily break that off and do a full video in that regard as well, right? I just know my videos get long, and I'm really trying to make a conscious effort to keep them, you know, within reason, closer to an hour, 45 minutes than an hour and a half, 2 hours and stuff. I know that just gets too much for some people, right? But yeah, let me stop, look at my list, and then I'll kind of carry on with the rest of the video, yeah? So yeah, I just went through my list, and it looks like most of the rest of my content that I want to do in the examples is all to do with food procurement. So I might just break that off, well, I will just break that off into a separate video and that kind of stuff, because, you know, I wanted to talk about trapping, I want to talk about fishing and all sorts of stuff. This net can do a whole bunch of different things, right? But one of the things I will kind of mention too, if you are looking at building one of these units out yourself. So now when it comes to these little cordage carabiners, now, I never mentioned that when, you know, the details of this, but we had put 2 knots in the line, one on the very end and one up about an inch or so. Now, when you put the lark's head on your line here, you want to have that second knot butt right up against that lark's head, and it kind of locks it in place. You know, it makes it far more difficult for these units to then come off later on. You can still get them off, it's just far more difficult. So I just kind of throw that out there as a subtle little tip where, you know, we had the loop, we had a bit of line, it went into a lark's head around this, and then we had a knot and then a space and then another knot. Just make sure that knot is butted right up against that lark's head as much as you can get it, and it'll really lock it in so that that lark's head never becomes loose, and that these things just permanently stay strapped, and they're way more firm when it comes to how they lock on. It almost becomes like a constrictor hitch. It's not, but it becomes that kind of mindset where it just becomes tighter and tighter and tighter and locks in on that. And then I'll just kind of shift the camera up and show you the net itself now. Now when we had made this net in the do-it-yourself video, a lot of these knots we had just loosely tied on. Now after a couple times of laying in this, now they'll all tighten up just from the weight of your body sitting on it. So I plan on doing that in the video of well, not necessarily in the video, but I plan on doing that now in field use, where I'll sit on the net and kind of shift my body around to ensure that my body weight lays onto these different knots across the entirety of the net, I'll really kind of move my butt around and stuff and just make sure everything locks down and in place. And if you're wondering why you see it kind of sag, that's more to do with there's tension that sits between these trees that are kind of pulling it out, but there's tension that pulls inwards as you apply the tension. That's what's giving this loose. It's not the fact that the net's deformed in any way, shape, or form. It's meant to be like this. It's meant to have that little bit of looseness to it. And if I had tied off to wider angles, we would see that that looseness all went away. But I didn't want that. I want to have it that when I sit in this net, that it's got that little bit of sink to it, so it becomes more like a comfortable chair, right? So there you have it, fellow YouTubers. Like I said, this is kind of going to be the first video that I do. I think the next video I'm going to break off into using the net for food procurement and that kind of stuff. It just there's a lot that this net can do, and talking about it all and trying to cram it into a single video just becomes a little much, right? But hopefully this shows you more of the kind of utilitarian aspects of using it around camp, you know. And for most people, they're not going to be doing survival fishing and survival trapping and that kind of stuff, you know. That's really kind of next level stuff, you know, of using this net, you know, as a net to catch animals or you know, to catch fish and that kind of stuff. But I still think it's good to know that knowledge, but I know that this covers a lot of the kind of better part of what people would actually be wanting to use this net for. And you can see, like I say, I'm kind of moving around, right? I want to shift my body weight on these knots and kind of lean and roll and put my weight onto it and make sure that every knot that's on this net is feeling the brunt of my fat ass sitting on here, so that it tightens it all up, right? And that's part of the process of doing this stuff. You know, when you use it out in the field, you're going to break in your gear, it's going to tighten it all up and stuff. But like I say, hopefully you got something out of this video. I really feel like doing nets in this kind of construct, you know, having these little cordage carabiner attachments, having the little drawstring with the modified Fairmont hitch and stuff, you know, just adding little components like that can really expand the functionality of a net when you're using it out in the field. You know, this can be used for a lot more things than I'm showing in this video. It's just time consuming to show you one example than the other, right? I could literally show you guys for hours and hours. But it's one of those things of, I strongly recommend that everybody have some sort of basic net in their gear, you know, as part of their kit. You know, even if it's, you know, well, my modular rope clamp system slipped on the tree a bit there, but you know, even if you don't go to the point of making one yourself, you know, right from scratch and stuff like I've done, even if you're buying a net and you're just modifying it to have some of the functionality like I have here, you can save yourself a bunch of time doing that, and you know, you're still going to get the functionality, but it's worth having. But yeah, I think adding any of this kind of gear to your kit is really invaluable. You know, it can serve a lot of function when you're out in the field, and it can help increase your survivability. You know, and to me that's key when you're out in the wilderness. You know, it's fine and dandy that you want to go off into the backcountry and do a weekend camping or stuff, but always have it in mind that, you know, if things turn south, you want to have the gear with you to be able to sustain yourself as you move through time. To me, having things like this Bushcraft net is one of those components that I would really want to have with me when I was out in the field. But like I say, I know I ramble and I'm really wanting to keep these videos short. I'm hoping to have that food procurement video done in the near future. There's a few other videos I want to put out too, and I know time's against me. I'm really busy in my own personal life right now, so getting time to stop and do videos, that's one of the reasons why I've had the delay between this and the last. Just been super busy, and I've got other commitments that I've got lined up over the next couple weeks. But hopefully I'll get the food procurement video out, you know, within reason in the near term future. And like I say, we've got some other projects coming down the pipeline. I've got Ropecraft handcuffs, which is an unusual thing, but it's kind of one of those things that I just developed. I had a person ask me, you know, what was my take on doing cordage handcuffs and that kind of stuff, and I developed a new system for doing that I think blows most of everything else I've seen on YouTube out of the water, and really would be kind of the ultimate handcuff, if you will. So I'd like to do a video on that, and there's some more solar videos and that kind of stuff I want to do. But like I say, I'm rambling again. But either way, if you enjoy this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Yeah, cheers.